She was just walking her son home from practice. That's all. No cameras, no crowd, just a quiet mom in a faded t-shirt and a 10-year-old boy with a soccer ball under his arm. But then came the two men, loud, mocking, looking for someone to shove around. And when they laid hands on her, she didn't even raise a hand. When the man slapped her right there in broad daylight with her 10-year-old son watching, she didn't retaliate. She just whispered two words to her son: "Stand behind me." Because the men who thought she was just a quiet mom who laughed when she didn't fight back had no idea who they were touching. But when she moved, when her hands did what only trained operators know how to do, that's when the crowd found out. That's when everything changed. The parking lot outside Fairview Plaza always smelled like cut grass and engine heat around this time of day. School was out, parents were off base, and the late afternoon sun angled low across windshields and chain stores. Not the kind of place you'd expect anything sharp to happen. Lieutenant Commander Sienna Maddox stepped out of the dry cleaners with a folded uniform bag over her shoulder and her son's hoodie clutched in her other hand. She wore civilian cargo pants, a faded navy blue t-shirt tucked at the waist, and mirrored sunglasses that did half the talking for her. Her son Theo skipped 2 steps ahead, a soccer ball tucked under his arm and grass stains still smudged across his shin. "You said we could get a smoothie after," he said without turning. "You say that like I forgot," Sienna replied, catching up with a half smile. "But you also said you wouldn't slide tackle during recess today." He turned, grinning. It wasn't a real slide, just a controlled deceleration. That's not a word a 10-year-old should use after falling on concrete. They crossed toward the Strip's corner smoothie shop, passing a line of parked cars and a couple of teenage skateboarders weaving in and out of cart returns. The kind of slow, drifting rhythm every base-adjacent suburb settled into between 1600 and dinner hour. Nothing urgent, nothing dangerous. And yet, without seeming to look, Sienna's eyes swept the area. Her pace adjusted a fraction as they moved between shadow and sun. She noted the skateboarders. Noticed the van with blackout tint still running near the end of the lot. Noticed the man arguing with someone on speakerphone 3 stores down, and just as quickly dismissed each one with the calm discipline of muscle memory. Theo didn't notice. He was mid-sentence about his school science fair when he paused to adjust the laces on his sneaker. Sienna instinctively reached her arm out to guide him back toward her side. Nothing dramatic, just protective placement. Subtle, constant, like she was always tracking vectors, even in peacetime. The smoothie shop door was propped open with a painted rock. A chalkboard sign advertised a mango special with too many exclamation points. Inside, there were 3 families ahead of them. A girl in braces asked for oat milk. A father in uniform gave his toddler the last sip of strawberry banana. "Go grab a table by the window," Sienna said, brushing Theo's shoulder. He took off toward the corner booth. She stayed behind to order. As she waited in line, a voice caught her attention behind her. Sharp, dismissive, young. "Move it, lady." Sienna shifted to the side calmly, not responding, just enough to let 2 young men pass. Early 20s, baseball caps low, walked past with swagger and cheap cologne. They didn't look at her again, but one of them muttered something under his breath, followed by a short laugh. She didn't react, didn't even blink. But she did glance just once toward her son at the booth, still smiling, still safe. Sienna turned back toward the counter and waited. Because this afternoon was supposed to be normal, but something in her gut had just shifted. And if there was one thing she'd learned in years of combat, convoy rides, and hostile terrain, it was the difference between noise and threat. And this wasn't noise. Why was her heart rate still steady when every instinct told her something was wrong? Outside the smoothie shop, the sun had dropped just enough to sharpen shadows beneath the awnings and make everyone squint as they stepped out. Sienna held both drinks, one mango strawberry, one plain banana with oat milk, and was scanning the sidewalk when she saw Thea standing by the corner of the plaza, back to the wall, clutching the soccer ball tighter than usual. She moved fast but not rushed. Training didn't let her do anything with panic. As she approached, she heard it. "Hey, tough guy," one of them was saying. "You think being a little mama's boy gets you out of saying excuse me?" Two young men stood between Theo and the rest of the sidewalk. Both were in their early 20s, baggy hoodies, mirrored sunglasses, sneakers too clean to have ever touched gravel, not in uniform, not local either, judging by the accent, but full of something close to a dare. Sienna stepped forward, placed the smoothies on the concrete bench beside the planter box, and inserted herself between her son and the two men without saying a word. Theo didn't say anything either, but his eyes locked on hers. She didn't kneel, didn't hug him, just a hand placed lightly on his shoulder, anchoring him. The taller of the two men leaned his weight from one foot to the other, smirking. "We just said watch it, lady. Your kid nearly rolled into us like a stray." Sienna spoke calmly. "He's 10, you're 20, adjust your posture accordingly." The second man, wiry and shorter, laughed like it was a bar joke. "Ah, now she's giving orders." Sienna didn't move. "No, I'm giving you an out." They looked at each other, half smirking, then glanced at Theo, who still hadn't moved. "Kid looks scared," the tall one said. "He's not," she replied, "but he's about to learn what a bad decision looks like from 6 feet away." The shorter one stepped forward, not with purpose, but with the swagger of someone used to bluffing. "Or what? You going to call your husband?" Sienna's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "He doesn't take these calls anymore," she said, "but I do." That made them pause, half a beat. But that was the danger with cowards who performed confidence. They often couldn't tell when the tide turned until it was pulling them under. Tall guy scoffed and turned to Theo. "Maybe next time you say sorry, kid." He reached forward, maybe to pat his head, maybe to tap the ball. That was the first time Theo flinched. Sienna stepped between the hand and her son so fast that the man barely registered it. "Back off," she said flatly. The shift was microscopic, only posture. Her shoulders squared, her head tilted 5 degrees to the left, her heels aligned beneath her like a platform, but it was enough for someone watching. An older man sitting near the bakery had been watching since the beginning. He put down his coffee. The two men didn't move yet. They were still playing. Theo looked up. "Mom." Sienna didn't look down, didn't break eye contact. "Stand behind me," she said, not loud, not angry, just final. And in that moment the balance of the street changed. The crowd didn't know why, but the men were about to find out. What happened next, no one expected. The plaza had gone quiet in the way public places do when something tense begins to take shape, but no one knows how it will end. A stroller wheel squeaked somewhere behind the smoothie shop. A shopping cart clanged against a curb. Even the skateboarders had stopped. Boards tipped on their sides, eyes half fixed on the slow-moving confrontation. The taller man shifted his weight, amused now, emboldened by the still attention gathering at the edges of the sidewalk. He angled his chin downward, looking at Sienna the way men do when they think silence means surrender. "You know what your problem is," he said, loud enough for the gathering crowd. "You think you're tough because you talk calm, but you're just scared." Sienna didn't answer. She didn't need to, because fear wasn't what kept her still. Discipline was. The shorter man circled slightly to her left, hands stuffed in his pockets, testing her reaction time. She tracked him without turning her head, peripheral vision sharpened by 1,000 hours of close-quarters drills. She knew where he was, where his weight was shifting, where his hands would go if he decided to commit. The taller one leaned in closer now, close enough that she could smell stale beer and arrogance. "I asked you a question, lady." Still she said nothing, just placed her other hand on Theo's shoulder, gently, a reminder, "You're safe, I'm here." The man's face twisted. "Oh, so now you're ignoring me." And that's when he did it. He shoved her, palm to the shoulder, hard enough to move her back half a step, hard enough for Theo to gasp, hard enough for the crowd to go completely silent. Sienna absorbed the impact without stumbling. Her weight redistributed smoothly. Her balance never broke. and her expression didn't change. Not one flicker of emotion crossed her face. The shorter man laughed nervously. Yo, she didn't even flinch. Because she can't do anything, the taller one said, louder now, playing to the audience. She's just another suburban mom pretending she's got options. He shoved her again, this time with both hands, and this time Theo grabbed her waist from behind, his voice breaking. Mom, please. She still didn't move, didn't raise her hands, didn't step back, just stood there like a wall that refused to crack. And then the man made his final mistake. He pulled his hand back and slapped her, open palm, across the face. The sound echoed across the plaza like a gunshot. A woman near the bakery gasped. A man dropped his shopping bag. Theo's breath hitched in his chest, tears welling in his eyes. Sienna's head turned slightly from the impact. Her sunglasses stayed on. Her body stayed still. And when she turned her face back toward him, slowly, deliberately, the man finally saw it. Something in her eyes that wasn't anger, wasn't fear. It was calculation. She reached up with one hand and removed her sunglasses, folded them carefully, handed them back to Theo without looking. Hold these, she said quietly. Her voice was so calm it made the air feel heavier. The taller man hesitated now, just for a second, because somewhere in his gut, some primal instinct was screaming that he'd made a terrible mistake. But pride wouldn't let him back down, not in front of a crowd, not in front of his friend. What are you gonna do? He said, trying to sound confident. Call the cops, get me arrested. Sienna took one slow breath, then another, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the plaza like a command from a different world, a world these men had never been part of. No, she said, I'm going to teach you what happens when you put your hands on someone who's spent the last 15 years learning how to stop people like you. The shorter man's smirk faded. Wait, what? But the taller one, still riding adrenaline and ego, stepped forward one more time. Big talk for someone who just took a slap and did nothing. Sienna's stance shifted, just slightly, her feet repositioned, her weight centered, her hands dropped to her sides, loose, ready. I gave you chances, she said. Multiple, you chose this. And then she moved. It wasn't wild. It wasn't angry. It was surgical. The taller man lunged forward, trying to grab her by the collar. Sienna sidestepped with minimal motion, redirected his momentum with one hand on his wrist, and used his own weight to send him stumbling past her. He caught himself on a planter box, confused, off balance. The shorter man rushed in from the side. Sienna pivoted, caught his arm mid-swing, twisted it into a control hold, and guided him smoothly to the ground. Not with force, with leverage, with angles, with 15 years of muscle memory that didn't require thought. He hit the pavement with a grunt. She released him immediately and stepped back, hands up, palms open, non-threatening. The taller man recovered and charged again, this time with real anger. Sienna didn't flinch. She waited until he was 2 steps away, then dropped her center of gravity, swept his lead leg, and let physics do the rest. He went down hard, shoulder first. The impact rattled through the concrete. The crowd was frozen. No one moved, no one spoke, they just watched. Sienna stood between both men and her son, breathing steady, posture controlled. She wasn't even winded. The taller man tried to get up. She placed one foot lightly on his chest, not pressing, just reminding. Stay down, she said. This is over. He looked up at her, finally seeing her for what she was. Not a victim, not a bystander, an operator. Who the hell are you? He breathed. Someone you should have walked past, she replied. Then she stepped back, gave him space, and turned toward Theo. She knelt down in front of him, eye level, and spoke softly. You okay? Theo nodded, eyes wide, still clutching her sunglasses. Good, she said, because I need you to remember this. Not the fight, the choice. I gave them options. They chose wrong, that's on them. Behind her, the older man in the Marine Corps shirt stood up from his bench. He didn't clap, didn't cheer. He just watched with the kind of respect that doesn't need words. Because he knew, he'd seen that kind of control before, that kind of restraint. That wasn't self-defense. That was years of training meeting the exact moment it was designed for. Why did she wait so long to act? Why didn't she strike back the moment she was hit? Because some lessons can't be taught with fists alone. The two men sat on the curb now, breathing hard, egos shattered, still trying to process what had just happened. The taller one held his shoulder. The shorter one stared at the ground. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Sienna stood a few feet away, Theo close at her side, watching them with the same calm intensity she'd carried through the entire encounter. The crowd had begun to murmur now, voices low, uncertain, like they'd just witnessed something they didn't have the language for. A woman in scrubs approached slowly. "Are you okay?" she asked Sienna. "Do you need medical?" Sienna shook her head. "I'm fine, thank you." The woman glanced at the two men on the curb. "What about them?" "They'll live," Sienna said simply, "but they'll remember." The older Marine stepped forward now, hands in his pockets, eyes sharp and assessing. He stopped a respectful distance away and gave Sienna a long look, the kind of look that said everything without saying anything. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "that was textbook." Sienna met his eyes, "Just training." He smiled faintly. "Most people with training don't have that kind of restraint. You gave them every out." She nodded once. They didn't take it. The Marine glanced down at Theo, then back at Sienna. "Your boy just learned something most grown men never figure out." "What's that?" Theo asked, voice small but steady. "That strength isn't about winning," the Marine said. "It's about control. Your mom had a dozen ways to end that in the first 5 seconds, but she waited, she measured, she taught." Theo looked up at his mother with new eyes. Eyes that saw past the cargo pants and the faded t-shirt. Eyes that saw the operator underneath. Sienna placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let's sit down for a minute," she said. They moved to a nearby bench, away from the crowd, away from the two men still processing their humiliation. Theo sat close to her, the soccer ball resting between his feet. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Were you scared?" "No," Sienna said. "Were you?" Theo hesitated, a little at first. "But then I saw your face and you looked." He paused, searching for the word ready. Sienna smiled faintly. "That's what training does. It replaces fear with preparation." "But you didn't hit them right away," Theo said. "Even after he hit you." Sienna turned to face him fully. "Because hitting back first doesn't prove you're strong, it proves you're reactive. I needed them to make every choice, every step. So when I finally moved, there was no question who was in the wrong." Theo processed that, so it wasn't about fighting. "No," Sienna said, "it was about teaching them, you, everyone watching." "What did you want me to learn?" She looked at him with the kind of love that only a mother who's seen war can carry. That you don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to throw the first punch to win. And you never, ever let someone else's anger dictate your actions. Theo nodded slowly. He understood. Maybe not all of it, but enough. Across the plaza, the taller man finally spoke. His voice was rough, shaken. "Hey." Sienna didn't turn immediately. She waited. Let him sit with his own discomfort for a few more seconds. Then she stood and walked over, Theo trailing just behind her. The man looked up at her, face pale, pride gone. "I didn't know." "Know what?" Sienna asked evenly. "That you were," he trailed off, "military." Sienna didn't confirm or deny, just watched him. "I thought," he stopped again, swallowed. "I thought you were just." "Just what?" she asked. "Just a mom." He nodded, ashamed. Sienna crouched down so they were eye level. "I am just a mom," she said, "but that doesn't mean I'm defenseless. And it doesn't give you the right to put your hands on me. Or anyone else." The shorter man spoke up now, voice quieter. "We messed up." "Yes," Sienna said, "you did. But here's the thing. You're going to remember this. And the next time you see someone you think looks easy to push around, you're going to think twice. because you never know who you're dealing with. The taller man exhaled slowly. Are you going to press charges? Sienna stood. That depends on you. If you walk away from here and learn something, then no. If you walk away and do this to someone else, then I'll make sure the next person you meet isn't as patient as I was. He nodded quickly. We're done, I swear. Good, Sienna said. Then this ends here. She turned back toward Theo, but the older Marine called out, Ma'am, one more thing. Sienna paused. You weren't just defending yourself, were you? He asked. Sienna glanced back at him. No, she said. I was showing my son what it looks like when you have power and choose not to abuse it. The Marine's expression softened. He placed 2 fingers to his brow in a crisp, silent salute. Nothing exaggerated, just 2 people who understood the weight behind it. Sienna returned a subtle nod, not out of pride, out of respect. The crowd began to disperse naturally like a tide pulling back after a surge. No one clapped, no one made noise, but no one forgot. And the 2 men who had once stood tall in mockery now sat quietly in their own silence. They didn't ask for help, didn't demand an apology, because the look on Sienna's face told them they were lucky the lesson had come with restraint and not regret. But the day wasn't over yet, and neither was the lesson. The police cruiser pulled in with its lights flashing, but no siren. Tires crunching slowly over the plaza's red brick loop. It wasn't called by Sienna, nor by any member of the crowd. Just a clerk from the neighboring pharmacy who had seen the shove, heard the slap, and decided to call it in without waiting to see how it ended. 2 officers stepped out. Standard suburban precinct blues, not military. 1 male, 1 female. Alert but not aggressive. Their eyes scanned the area. First toward the 2 men still sitting on the curb. Then toward Sienna, standing calmly beside her son who hadn't let go of the smoothie. What happened here? The male officer asked. Sienna didn't answer first. The man in the Marine shirt did. Ma'am de-escalated a situation, he said, gesturing toward the downed pair. These 2 made contact with her son. She stepped in. They escalated. She responded precisely. The female officer looked from him to Sienna. You're the one who was struck. Sienna gave a single nod. Any injuries? No. The taller man on the ground grunted. She threw me on concrete. The Marine laughed softly. No, son, you threw yourself. She just let gravity finish the job. The officers approached Sienna and Theo. Ma'am, we'll need your name for the record, the female officer said gently. Witnesses already said you didn't provoke anything but. Sienna produced her ID without a word, handed it over. The officer glanced down, her eyebrows lifted slightly. Lieutenant Commander, she asked. Retired, active Special Operations Group, local resident on base. The other officer blinked. Your Navy SEAL. Sienna nodded once, former. They both looked at each other, then back at the men on the curb. The wiry one tried to speak. She didn't say that up front. Shouldn't have needed to, the Marine muttered behind them. The officers moved methodically now. Statements were taken. Several bystanders stepped forward, offering brief but unified summaries of what had happened. No exaggeration, just facts. She warned them, gave them chances. They touched her son first. She didn't start it. One woman handed over a video file, already airdropped to her phone. The male officer turned back toward Sienna as the scene settled. Do you wish to press charges? Sienna looked down at Theo. His eyes had steadied. The earlier fear replaced by something deeper, understanding. She looked back at the officer. No, she said, I don't need them charged. I need them to remember. The officers paused. Then the female one said, understood. Theo tugged at his mother's shirt. Why not? She knelt for the first time all afternoon. One knee on the pavement, eyes level with her son. Because if they ever try this again, she said softly, with someone who can't stop them, there won't be a lesson left to learn. Theo nodded slowly. She stood again, tall, composed, untouched. The taller man looked up at her now. Not angry, not defensive, just aware. For the first time that day, he seemed to recognize who he'd been speaking to. The Marine approached quietly and offered Sienna a folded slip of paper. "What's this?" she asked. "Local Veteran Resource Council," he said. "We do community outreach. If you ever want to speak at the school or mentor, we'd be proud to have you." She accepted it with a nod. "I'll think about it." The officers walked the two men over to the cruiser, not in cuffs, but with a silence that didn't need steel to feel like consequence. As they pulled away, the small crowd fully dispersed, and the plaza returned to its normal hum, only now it carried a different tone, quieter, more alert. Because they'd just seen something rare, not force, not revenge, control. What would you do if you had to choose between protecting your pride and protecting your child? The plaza had mostly emptied by the time Sienna and Theo began walking again. No one stopped them. No one asked questions. And yet every passerby offered a subtle nod. One of those rare acknowledgments between strangers who had just witnessed something they didn't quite have the words for. Theo stayed close at her side, holding his smoothie in one hand. Soccer ball tucked under the other arm. His walk was slower now, not tired, not scared, just thoughtful. They didn't talk at first. Sienna didn't feel the silence. She never had. She walked the way she fought, measured, alert, present. Theo finally broke the quiet. "Why didn't you tell me before?" She didn't ask what he meant. She knew. "That I was a SEAL?" she asked. He nodded. "Or that you could do all that? The fighting, the calm, everything." She gave a faint smile without looking down. "Because it's not who I am all the time. It's just what I've trained to do when it's necessary." "But that guy hit you." "I've been hit before," she said. "Didn't it make you mad?" Sienna took a breath, then answered carefully. "It made me alert. That's not the same as angry." Theo looked down. I thought you'd hit him back right away." "I could have," she said, "but then he wouldn't have learned anything, and neither would you." Theo looked up at her, his eyes clearer than they'd been all day. "You weren't trying to win." "No," she said. "I was trying to show you what not to become." They walked past the empty bench where the smoothies had first been set down. The sun had dipped behind the far roofline now, casting long shadows down the side of the strip. Sienna adjusted her pace so Theo stayed just ahead, subtly watching the way he carried himself. He didn't look shaken, he looked older. They reached the car and Sienna unlocked it with a chirp of the fob. She opened the back door for him, waited as he slid in, then handed him the last of the napkins from her pocket. He wiped his hands, then leaned forward as she closed the door. Before she got in the driver's seat, he spoke again. "Are you going to tell anyone?" She paused with one hand on the door handle. "No," she said, "but I think they already did." The smile that crossed his face wasn't wide, but it was the kind that lasted. Because for the first time in his life, he understood something most kids don't until much later. His mother wasn't just the one who packed his lunches, signed his permission slips, and told him to wear his helmet. She was someone people underestimated once, and never again. Sienna slid into the driver's seat, checked the mirror, started the engine. As they pulled out of the plaza, the last thing she saw was the man in the Marine shirt still standing outside the bakery, watching them leave. He didn't wave, but he nodded once. So did she. And then she drove on. That night Theo sat at the kitchen table doing homework while Sienna made dinner. The house was quiet except for the sound of vegetables being chopped and the occasional scratch of pencil on paper. Normal sounds, safe sounds. But something had changed between them. Not broken, not distant, just deeper. Theo looked up from his math worksheet. "Mom." "Yeah?" "What you said earlier, about not becoming like them, what did you mean?" Sienna set down the knife, wiped her hands on a towel, came over and sat across from him. "I meant that anger is easy," she said. "Hitting back is easy, but controlling yourself when someone's trying to make you lose control, that's hard. That's what separates people who survive from people who just react. Theo traced a circle on the table with his finger. So you weren't scared at all. I didn't say that, Sienna replied. I said I was alert. Fear and alertness can look the same on the outside, but inside they're completely different. Fear makes you freeze or run. Alertness makes you ready. But you've done this before, Theo said, like in the military. Sienna nodded. Many times, in places a lot more dangerous than a parking lot. Theo hesitated, then asked the question he'd been holding all evening. Did you ever have to hurt someone, like really hurt them? Sienna didn't look away. She didn't soften the truth. Yes, she said, when there was no other choice, when it was them or the people I was protecting. Does it bother you? Every time, Sienna said quietly. That's how I know I'm still human. Theo absorbed that, then spoke again. The man you said about Dad not taking calls anymore. Sienna's expression shifted, just slightly. Your father was a good man, she said. He taught me a lot about patience, about choosing your battles. He would have been proud of you today. Why? Because you didn't panic, you trusted me, and you listened. Theo nodded, then went back to his homework. But Sienna stayed at the table a little longer, watching her son, seeing pieces of his father in the way he held his pencil, in the way he furrowed his brow when he concentrated, in the quiet strength he was learning to carry. She stood, went back to the counter, finished making dinner. And when they sat down to eat together, they didn't talk about what happened. They talked about his science project, about the soccer game next week, about whether they should get a dog. Normal things, safe things, because that's what Sienna had fought for, not glory, not recognition, just the right to have quiet nights with her son where the biggest decision was whether to get a golden retriever or a lab. That night after Theo went to bed, Sienna sat on the back porch with a cup of tea. The air was cool, the stars were out. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked. She thought about the men from the plaza, about the fear in their eyes when they finally understood, about the Marine who saluted her, about the officer who recognized her rank. But mostly she thought about Theo, about the way he'd stood behind her when she told him to, about the questions he'd asked afterward, about the man he was starting to become. Because that's what mattered, not the fight, not the crowd, not even the lesson she'd taught the two men. What mattered was that her son had seen his mother choose restraint over rage, discipline over destruction, and that he'd learned something he'd carry for the rest of his life. That true strength isn't loud, it doesn't need to prove itself, it simply exists, quiet, steady, unshakable. And when the moment comes, it acts, not out of anger, but out of necessity, not for revenge, but for protection. Sienna finished her tea, went inside, locked the door, checked on Theo one more time. He was asleep, soccer ball on the floor beside his bed, homework stacked neatly on his desk. She pulled the door almost closed, left it open just enough to hear him if he called. Then she went to her own room, changed out of her clothes, and for the first time that day allowed herself to feel the weight of what had happened. Not the fight, that was easy, that was training, that was muscle memory. But the moment her son had flinched, the moment she'd seen fear in his eyes, the moment she'd realized he was watching everything, learning everything, becoming who he'd be because of what she chose to show him. That was the weight. That was what kept her awake, not the men, not the confrontation, but the responsibility of being the example, of being the standard, of being the one her son measured strength against. She lay in bed, stared at the ceiling, and made herself a promise. The same promise she'd made the day Theo was born, the same promise she'd made every day since. That she would never let anger win, never let pride dictate her actions, never let someone else's weakness become her excuse to be less than she was trained to be. Because Theo was watching, not just today, every day, and the person he'd become would be shaped by the person she chose to be, not in the big moments, but in the quiet ones, the frustrating ones, The moments when it would be easier to yell, to lash out, to prove she was right. Those were the moments that mattered. Those were the tests that counted, and she would pass every single one, not for herself, but for him. Because that's what mothers do, especially the ones who have been trained to survive anything. They don't just protect their children from the world. They protect them from becoming the worst version of themselves. And sometimes the most powerful thing a mother can do isn't fight. It's choose not to, until the moment it's absolutely necessary. And then when that moment comes, to move with precision, with control, with purpose. Not to win, but to teach. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in that action, in that choice, in that restraint, the world learns what real strength looks like. Not loud, not violent, not cruel, just present, just prepared, just powerful enough to protect, controlled enough to teach, and wise enough to know the difference between proving you can and knowing you don't have to. That's what Sienna Maddox understood. That's what she carried. That's what she passed on. Not through words, not through speeches, but through one afternoon in a parking lot where two men learned what it means to push someone who spent a lifetime learning how to push back. And a 10-year-old boy learned what it means to stand behind someone who will never let you fall.